Hi class, so this week we are exploring consciousness. Consciousness is a it's really fascinating aspect of being alive to look at, and in our exploration of consciousness this week, we are looking at sleep and dreams, which are always really fun things to discuss, and then we're also looking at substances and how different, more kind of like substances and substance abuse. So we're seeing how things like drugs, alcohol have effects on our body and our consciousness. Alright guys, so when it comes to consciousness, it's kind of a hard thing to define because we just don't really know what it is or where it comes from. It's something that's separate from our body and our brain, but it's still very connected to our body and our brain. In many ways, we think of consciousness as being a soul. I mean, we call it our mind, we call it our psyche. These are just other words that are just trying to explain that inner realm, that inner world that goes on inside our head, right? So, a little interesting fact here. So when it comes to the different branches of psychology, we of course kind of look at different aspects of consciousness. Transpersonal psychology and eco-psychology are kind of fun branches because they really explore these other states of consciousness that we don't really get to talk about much. And kind of the mainstream, or maybe they're a little, they've been kind of sensationalized in mainstream media, and in many ways they've maybe, I'm going to say they're kind of turned into kind of jokingly type subjects. So thinking about things like, experiences with like the paranormal. There actually is a whole field of psychology that is dedicated to the paranormal. It is called parapsychology. One of my professors, her and her husband, actually have their PhDs in parapsychology, and so they do a lot of studies and investigations and journal writings on stuff like that. So pretty cool stuff. So then I also want to point out that the father of American psychology is William James. And William James, he was around 1800s there. Maybe more like the now I'm going to go into 200-year time span here. I think 1800s is more when he was alive. He was he really gave us a good understanding of just the field of psychology in general. He's a very interesting man. He wrote, I can't remember the name of it, but he wrote one of the most definitive texts in psychology, and it's something that we still even use and study today. And so for James, he defined consciousness as a stream. So basically what this means is that all those thoughts and voices and songs and pictures and movies and just everything that goes on in our inner world, it's kind of, think of it like it's like a river. It's all kind of flows and it all sways and moves, and you got the ebb and the flow and meandering and things swirl around and just like if you go out and you look how water moves. He had the idea that that's kind of how that inner world of ours works and moves. And so even though as individuals we're always in our heads, right? When it comes to consciousness is kind of, we define it more as our awareness of the outside world, okay? So consciousness is our awareness of everything that is going on at any given moment. And that relates to, the external world and the internal world. Remember, we talked about the brain and it working on these neurotransmitters. So we know that we are constantly inundated with stimuli from our environments, that our central nervous system, works very diligently to help just organize and make sense of for us. And then at the same time, that this is kind of what makes us unique, and why we're like, we say consciousness is our awareness. Consciousness is it's kind of the brain observing itself, because as our central nervous system and all those processes we talked about with the brain are going on, you guys remember, a lot of that our brain shields us from. We don't have to kind of think about it, but then at the same times we can think about stuff. We have that self-awareness, and that's in many ways what we say sets humans apart from other species, because as far as we know, we are the only species that have the level of self-awareness. Like I said, we know our brains can think about our brains, and we're not really sure if that's so with other animals. But at the same time, we do acknowledge that other species have some form of consciousness. And then just lastly, most of our everyday, just waking normal hours of life, we spend that in just what we would just consider our consciousness, just our normal state of consciousness. It's that waking consciousness there, okay? So like I said, so when it comes down to, defining and just, really trying to figure out what consciousness is, we don't really know. There are some interesting theories, though, on what it could be. I didn't write this one down, but I have 2 videos listed here. I actually just came across that other one today, and it's kind of like an update. So it's like in the first video, David Chalmers is, he's kind of explaining what consciousness is and these different theories on consciousness. And then in this updated one, he just kind of has a more, just that guy's updated ideas on it. But he really goes more into the illusion idea of consciousness, whereas in this first video, he briefly mentions that, because that is one theory, that consciousness, it's an illusion that our brains create. And that's as much as I know about that one there. I finished watching that video too. But in this first video, and the reason I included it's pretty short, it's like under 20 minutes, and students generally enjoy it. I think you guys would enjoy it too. But in it, Professor Chalmers is talking about these 2 kind of what he calls kind of weird and off the wall ideas of what consciousness are, and I don't really think they're that weird and off the wall. I think in many ways they make a lot of sense. So I'm just gonna just kind of, I do encourage you to go watch the video, but I'm also gonna, I have my little quick explanation here of the points that he makes. So basically, those 2 theories are that consciousness, it's a fundamental building block of the universe. Just like we have space, just like we have time, just like we have mass, consciousness is just, it's this fundamental thing that exists, and so it's, kind of the driving force for everything else, just like those other building blocks of the universe are that driving force, that kind of holds everything together, creates everything, right? And then the next idea, and I really think that both these ideas work together. This next idea is that consciousness is panpsychic, as they call it, panpsychism. I think I spelled it right, but I'm not sure. So pan just means all, and then psyche, like I already said, psyche just relates to the mind, so it's talking about the mind. And it's kind of funny too, because when we talk about psyche from like the Freudian sense, or kind of the neo-Freudians, We see that psyche also relates to personality. It kind of means the personality parts of our mind, and that's interesting too, because that's something that consciousness seems to be a part of, yet it's still separate from that. So basically with this panpsychism idea it's that consciousness, it's universal. So I mean, it's universal. That means it's everywhere. It exists everywhere, and it exists in everything. And that means it's a fundamental element of the universe, right? But so basically, if you look at life from kind of the a biological model, let's go with that. And we know that from the biological model of life, we have systems that work together, right? Or like microorganisms, macroorganisms. We have ecosystems. There's all types of systems and complexities to life. And so with panpsychism, they're suggesting that everything has some form of consciousness, even down to tiny nanoparticles and just tiny microscopic lives. Now that doesn't mean that protons and neutrons and all electrons, they're all bouncing around and they're thinking, oh, here I am bouncing around out in space. It's not like that. It's just that there's some kind of consciousness that is driving kind of their trajectory and driving what they're doing. And as we move up those systems, those kind of, we say, levels of complexity, levels of intelligence, that actually get consciousness, we get consciousness, then it becomes more complex, and it's something that we can measure, kind of like with intelligence. There's this thing with intelligence, it's kind of G factor, and it's just all about how we go about determining that criteria for what we call intelligence. Sorry, my dog. Go Max. And what we measure that intelligence. So very interesting ideas on consciousness, right guys? Hopefully we'll get the chance to discuss this in our discussions too. All right, so when it comes to consciousness, we know that we have different states. We have our normal waking consciousness, which are our everyday lives, right? And then we have those states of sleep and dream. So, when we're sleeping, when we're dreaming, we're still conscious. We're in another state. And the same thing with daydreams. We can kind of include those into that kind of we still exist, and but it's kind of like our bodies are resting kind of states there. This will be the same with hypnosis and meditative states too, in many ways. So it's just when we're in these different states of consciousness, basically we note them by brain activity. So no matter what state of consciousness we are in, there's some sort of neuroelectrical activity going on, and parts of our brain are being lit up. And through experiments and research, we have gone to distinguish these different stages here. So then we also have altered states of consciousness. This would be, this is when you see shifts, and like I have typed here, shifts in the quality or pattern of mental activity. So what are we talking about there? Altered states, they don't just have to be induced by drugs, or things like psychedelics or opioids. It could be, say, mental disorders, some type of severe brain trauma, stress, some type of and related to stress, it could be something traumatic that happened to us, that can affect our minds. And then we have things like transpersonal states of consciousness, and these would be more along the parapsychology stuff that I was talking about earlier. So these would be like spiritual experiences. They would be out of body experiences, near death experiences, and then you do have, alien abductions, ghosts, demons, angels, fairies, and any other kind of, mystical or mythical or unknown beings or realities that, exist, and people think that they have contacted. That, we can't say it's all just mental disorders, because we can't go back and really define what is consciousness. And pretty interesting stuff that goes on with some of that parapsychology research, especially when it comes to things like alien abductions. It was actually a Harvard scientist, I can't remember his name right now. I can't remember his name, but it was a Harvard scientist who actually started working with people who claimed to be abducted by aliens, and he was doing a hypnosis with them. I think he might have got disbarred from Harvard for that, but so like I said, nonetheless, some really interesting stuff going on there. So then that leads us to our last two, hypnotic states and meditative states. And in many ways, those states are kind of similar, because when our brains are under a hypnotic state, or if we're really relaxed in a meditative or mindful state, we are in kind of we're in different parts of our brain, and kind of a little more susceptible to the power of suggestion. But, I feel like I said that and it makes it sound negative, and it's not a negative thing there, but we'll talk a little bit more about hypnosis here in a few minutes. Okay, so to really understand and explore consciousness, we really need to look at Freud and one of his main contributions to psychology, which is his idea of how our minds and bodies work together. Remember, psychology, we're studying the mind-body connection there. And so for Freud, he believed that it was the unconscious part of our mind that was really controlling our behavior. So this might be a little hard to grasp, but try to stay with me here. So basically, when we say when we say a lot of times, oh, you said that subconsciously, that's kind of we kind of have a little backwards in my opinion, because for Freud would have said, no, it was more unconscious, because the unconscious is the one that controls all the behavior. So if you had this kind of little Freudian slip, it was buried deep in your unconscious mind. And so what kind of slips us up on that concept is the word unconscious itself, because unconscious indicates that you're not in waking consciousness, right? It means you're not aware of what's going on. Think about it. If you're unconscious, you're blacked out, right? And so that slips us up. So like, well, if you're unconscious and in this blacked out state and unaware of what's going on, how is that what's controlling your behavior? And I can't really answer that question. It just comes back to kind of what I keep saying about how our bodies work on the inside. There's a lot of things that our brains kind of shield from us, so we don't have to think about those parts and what's going on in them. So in many ways, we are unconsciously controlled, because we're not aware. Like that, I'm scratching my arm right now. It's kind of I'm consciously performing that act, but it's from an unconscious thing in my brain, because I don't hear my brain telling me to scratch my arm. You guys get where I'm going with that? So all right, so now that I kind of got that out of the way, let me back up here a little bit. So Freud thought that the mind was like an iceberg, and if you think about an iceberg, think about how an iceberg works. We may see icebergs and they're like really big, they look huge on top of the water, but that's just a small tiny part of them, because under the water they're like mountains, so the conscious mind, that everyday waking consciousness, is that tiny tip of the iceberg that you can see above the water. Our preconscious mind is, I think you guys will be more familiar with it, called the subconscious. The preconscious is our subconscious mind. That's in the middle. It's right below the conscious mind, okay? And then the unconscious mind, that's that big part that's that big mountain under the water that nobody sees, and that the Titanic didn't know was there, right? And so since that is the bottom, that's the biggest part, because that's where everything gets stored. Our past experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, our motivations, our decisions, our memories, everything, be them good or bad. Everything is in our unconscious mind, and all of that plays a role in dictating and controlling and influencing our behaviors. Now, this idea that the mind is that we can break our brain up into a conscious mind, a subconscious, and an unconscious. He didn't really mean that you can actually dissect the brain and find those, like you can, say, the hypothalamus and the amygdala. They're not necessarily parts, structures to the brain. They're more concepts of how the brain works, and then once again, how this thing called consciousness interplays with those inner workings of our brain. All right, so just like I said, so that subconscious mind, that's the one that's just below our conscious mind. That's where we store most of our memories. You got to think of it as the more present stuff. The more present stuff, the stuff that we use all the time, that's kind of what sits in our subconscious mind. When we go to it's kind of like, it's like a waiting room too. So this is where that those ideas, those thoughts that we always need to have present, but we don't really need in our everyday awareness, kind of muddling that up, they sit in there and they wait to be called up to our conscious mind. So think of it as like when you're studying for a test. When you study for a test, that information, it goes down into your unconscious, but in order for you to be able to recall it for your test, it just goes and sits there in your subconscious mind. Right, guys? And so it is that stuff that we can easily bring into conscious reality, and more unpleasant and tragic stuff gets stored in that unconscious mind. And so, like I said, for Freud, a lot of looking at, because he did deal with mental patients and he was looking into mental illnesses and abnormal behaviors, a lot of the unconscious mind was, you see as you read this slide, there's kind of a lot of negative elements to that. And that's okay, because being human, we are a spectrum of good and bad things, right, guys? And even the bestest of us, every once in a while we have this little weird disturbing thought, right? You have that weird dream, and I don't know, weird dream. You guys know what I'm talking about, those disturbing weird dreams, and you wake up and you're like, oh my God, where did that come from? That's something in our unconscious mind. And then just, to note, that for Freud and then for Jung, Carl Jung, things like that, those types of dreams, they're just symbols. It's representing something that, means something else. So just to give you an example, it's kind of, I know it's a gross example, guys, but we'll just keep it Freudian. Here we go. You have a dream, you're kissing your mother. That's Freud's whole Oedipus complex there. Does that really mean you want to kiss your mother? No. It's it's going to represent, say, something else, like the mother, represents the feminine part of you. So it's more about maybe embracing your feminine part, and the kissing is an act of love, and that goes back to the feminine kind of nurturing part, and so basically it's maybe relating to something emotional or in your mood or temperament that your unconscious mind is trying to tell you that you need to pay attention to, and you need to fix inside yourself. And so it does it in that disturbing and profound of a way, as a way to kind of help you, as a way to help you. The thing where those dream symbols come into play is that especially for more well, for Freud, but more so for Jung, believed that we each had to figure out what our own dream symbols were. Since dreams were product of our minds, be it whatever part, unconscious, conscious, or subconscious, they are a part of our consciousness, and in many ways they are kind of just working junk out, and a lot of it does have to do with trying to tell us stuff, but we're just trying to tell ourselves stuff. And so it's important that we try to figure out what those elements mean for us. Of course, there are a lot of dream dictionaries out there, because there are some common themes that we see in dreams. Actually, I gave you kind of an Oedipus complex one there, but really, dream about water. Water, it seems to universally, and for a long time, we believe that when dreaming something that involves water, it definitely relates to emotions. It's really interesting. One of the, he's not even a psychologist, but one of the most thorough kind of like dream interpretations book or writings that we have is from Edgar Cayce. And Edgar Cayce was a psychic and a mystic back in the 1900s, and so he would talk to the dead. People would come to him and tell him about their dreams, and he would interpret their dreams for them. Really interesting guy. And it's kind of interesting too, because psychology in America that kind of did start in that kind of mysticism realm. And, they were really big into things like spirit boards, back when Ouija boards weren't about contacting the devil. That was something that, got sensationalized and popularized with movies and television. But in the beginning, those they were just kind of like tools. People were curious about these ideas. What is consciousness? What is life? What is death? Do we have a soul? And so, they would have these spirit photos, and they'd hold these seances, and it was just about trying to connect with those dead loved ones, and trying to figure some of these ideas out. So alright, hopefully in saying that, you guys have had time to thoroughly read over all of this. So let me pick up on one point here. So since our unconscious mind does store everything in it, even that disturbing stuff that we're not sure where it comes from sometimes, we tend to maybe repress some things. Freud had this idea of what he called defense mechanism. You guys should know defense mechanisms: projection, just that repression. And in many ways, those defense mechanisms are ways that are, once again, our brains keep us safe. It keeps us safe from kind of some of our own unconscious motives and feelings, and but at the same time, they're also a way that we avoid dealing with those unconscious issues, right? Alright, so at the base of our unconscious mind, since that is what's controlling all of our behavior, Freud really breaks it down to, it's really our eros and our thanatos that control us. Those are the most primal things that all life has. It's sex and aggression drive. So the eros is our sex drive, or we call it our life drive. Thanatos is the aggression drive, or it's the death drive, or kind of the destroyer drive there. And so he thought that basically, it's not that Freud says, we want to all run around and mate and kill each other. We can't all run around and mate and kill each other in society. What happens when we see these kind of unnatural aggressions and violence and sexual things come up, it's once again, it's about something else. It's just the way the our unconscious mind is manifesting that information for us. And in a way, if you think about it, it makes sense. Since a lot of times we're kind of oblivious to what's going on, if our brain really wants to reach out to us and be like, hey, something's wrong, it's got to do it in a way that's really going to get our attention, right? I have to think about with kind of like with diseases too, like when my mom got her brain tumor, it wasn't until she started having seizures, it's like her brain had to really, say, hey, something's not right in here before, we were all able to catch what was going on there. So that's just really, what I think it comes down to is really what Freud is talking about with a lot of his ideas and theories there. And then for fun, Freudian slips. And so once again, this is a way that Freud thought that our unconscious mind spoke to us. And a good example would be like, because sex was a big thing for Freud, because of his own kind of mental issues there, but we'll say that for another lecture. But Freudian slip, so it'd be something like, instead of saying though, you would say thigh, or something like that, or sometimes how you slip up and maybe you'll say somebody else's name when you're talking to somebody, or you guys know what Freudian slips are, definitely. All right, so now let's think about hypnotism. So like I said, when you're hypnotized, you're in a different state of mind, and it means your brain is different brain waves are going on. You have different brain patterns going on, and hypnosis, we're really susceptible to being influenced by others. From a psychological perspective in general, the power of suggestion is just that, very powerful indeed. And, we get subliminally power of suggestion a lot with advertisements. But hypnosis, it's once again, it's something a little different, working on some different brain waves there. So, more to the beginning of psychology in America, like I said, it was all on these ideas of mysticism, this ideas of, really just trying to figure out what the afterlife was, and contacting spirits and the dead. And, and that's something that really, since the beginning of time, we see many other cultures engage in those type of things. Some of them still do. And so one of the big things that came about in the 1900s during this whole movement here was an idea called mysticism. Off the top of my head, it's Edward Manet, or it's like mysticism, but it's like the first few letters of it, Men's or something. I can't remember how to say it. But so he came up with this idea that was, pretty much hypnosis, and it was very radical in Western society, and it was actually something that he got from Eastern cultures, because it's very much akin to meditation in many ways, right? All right, so when it comes to hypnotism, we have to be really careful, because you have the fun kind of Siegfried Roy, David Copperfield, side, David Blaine kind of side, the magic kind of side of it. And then you have like the actual therapeutic side of it. So like when you go to Vegas and they have those hypnotists and they call people up on stage and he hypnotizes everybody, and when he snaps his fingers, said everybody's going to act like a duck, and everybody acts like a duck. For the most part, that's kind of, it's not necessarily staged, but it's it's everybody playing along. There are some videos you can find on YouTube where you see people clearly not playing along, or you see that they are playing along, and just from their faces, they know that it's just kind of all a gag. It's entertainment, and they're just doing it to entertain people. Now, that's different than a therapist that uses hypnotism. So if you want to use hypnotism, go to a licensed psychologist, psychiatrist, licensed therapist that happens to practice hypnotism. Don't go to a hypnotist that doesn't have a license there. Hypnotism is really good for helping with overcome addictions. It helps with kind of overcoming sexual traumas and other types of traumas that would require self-healing. But the trick with hypnotism is that even though the power of suggestion is able to, influence us, we kind of already have to have it in our mind, you know. So like say if you want to you've been trying to quit smoking, you've exhausted all the options, and so now you're going to go to hypnotism. In order for that hypnotism to work and help you stop smoking, you have to already have it in your head. You have to already have convinced yourself that that is what you want to do. Right? That's kind of how, you know, in many ways meditation works that way. So, you know, it's all about, you know, getting that idea to stick and then, you know, convincing ourselves of it, right? And guided meditations, or what we call guided visualizations, they can work in the same way. And just mindfulness practices and different types of meditation, you know, they all kind of have that ability to kind of help us you know, heal our minds and our bodies. But you know, I am studying mindfulness practices for my PhD, but I'm still really big on science too, and you know, I think that, you know, the balance there is to you know, couple them out. You know, you can have those mindfulness practices and therapy, but you know, you've got to also have those medical advances too. So all right, so when it comes to hypnosis, we do have some facts and myths that seem to surround it. So basically, hypnosis will not make your strength increase. It won't increase your memory. It won't make you really return to being 2 years old, even if you wake up and start, you know, babbling like a baby. And it will not regress you to a past life, even if you claim to be the Queen of England now and speaking a British accent. You know, hypnotism can't do it. Once again, those are that magic show entertainment part of it, okay? But, you know, like I said, it can help with overcoming addictions. It can produce amnesia. Wait, I'll talk about that in just a minute. I forgot about that. It can help overcome addictions. It can help you with relaxing. It can help with pain reduction, and it can help with I say altering sensory impressions. That's not a negative thing either. That means like some kind of damage that it can help you like regain those parts of your brain. And then the this idea about it can produce amnesia. Basically, there are different types of amnesia, and it's kind of it's a disassociation is what's going on there. And so kind of when you wake up after being in a meditative state, after being in a hypnotic state, since you're in a different part of your brain and your brain waves are functioning differently, somehow going back to those normal brainwave functions, you do kind of you do have a kind of a moment of like, whoa, you know, one of those, kind of like think about like daydreaming, or when you wake up too fast or something like that, and you kind of like that snap back into reality kind of feeling, and you're like, whoa, where am I? What am I doing here? You know, that's a type of disassociation, and it's, you know, it has something to do with, you know, like I said, those changing brain waves and coming back into that hidden consciousness. And then that's what we call it when, you know, the whole magic side of hypnosis. It's that social cognition, you know, to where you're just playing along. However, the thing with hypnosis too, and being in like meditative mindfulness type states, is that we still have that little hidden observer inside of ourselves that kind of remains aware. If you're not really good at meditation or mindfulness, that hidden observer is not hidden at all, because, you know, that's kind of one of the parts, is taking those voices, you know, all the chatter in our brains, and kind of quieting it down so that we do go into those other areas of our brain. All right, so when it comes to transpersonal meditative states, we have, you know, they can help us heal. They put us into other states of awareness. For many cultures, we say that they put us in higher states of consciousness, right? And then we have the idea about the collective consciousness, and then the collective unconsciousness, which Jung is he's the one that popularized that. So basically, the collective unconscious is just that. It's So we all have that repertoire in our brains of all that stuff we've ever been through in our lives that's in our unconsciousness, right? As a human species, we have that too. So basically that collective unconsciousness, it's all that stuff, all those experiences that we of ever being human, of just anything you can know that exists, is in that. And so when we have these different states of awareness, when we have those dreams that maybe feel lucid dreams, or dreams that feel really real, nightmares, or those states where we think we're in conscious awareness, but just not quite. There's something else going on there. We think that it's because it's somehow tapping into that collective unconsciousness. There's also, so a lot of this really comes from Eastern philosophies and kind of Eastern teachings, and actually Carl Jung was really big into those. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but it's called the Akashic Records. So let me summarize it. So basically, when it comes to consciousness and reality, there are different levels of that you either work up or you work down. And when it comes to and at those higher levels, once you start getting into these transpersonal and these higher consciousness, then you can go to these other planes of existence. And there is this one that's called the Akashic Records, and it is this plane of existence where everything about human history, it's like all the knowledge of everything that ever is and ever was, is in these on this Akashic plane. And we all have the ability to kind of access it, but I'm not familiar enough with how to do. You got to like meditate and do stuff like that to go to it. And so Carl Jung was a big believer in that, and he was really cool, guys. He had like this whole dream world that he would go into. He would write his dreams down. He knew all about his dream symbols and everything, cool stuff. But here's what's kind of cool about the Akashic Records too. People like Bill Gates, people like Albert Einstein, people like Stephen Hawking, these really smart intellectual people we've had in society. They have spoke of, how did they come up with the things that they came up with? They said, it came to me in a dream. And even some of them even speak about having these experiences of going to the Akashic plane and seeing these Akashic records. So pretty interesting stuff there. So all right. So hopefully you guys have had time to read over this. The only thing that I really want to point out on this slide is this idea of our ego self. As if we go back to think about, those theories of consciousness, of it being this universal, systematic, fundamental element of the universe, then it exists outside of us, which means it exists out in the natural world too. And since that natural world, this planet, so it is the idea that the planet has a consciousness, right? And once again, we can't say that the planet is all these people stomping on me like we think, but there's something there, some fundamental universal element that is driving our planet to exist the way that it does. And so the ego cells, it's about acknowledging our part in the world. It's about realizing that we have this consciousness awareness inside of us, but we also share this conscious and unconscious awareness with everything else that we share this planet and this universe with. And so when we can tap into that ego selves, basically what it does is it helps show us the interconnectivity of all of that. And so in many ways, that helps us find that non-duality, that helps us move up those paths of self-actualization, so that we do reach those higher levels of consciousness. We are those positive agents of social change, and it's all about lessening conflict, finding peace, and then the key to everything, balance. All right, and then like I told you guys, so like I said, William James thought that consciousness was a stream, so everything moves around like rivers. The way I would think of that, so consciousness is the stream, and then all the movies in our brains, all the voices, all the pictures, all the songs, whatever else, I would imagine they're all like the little branches that flow down that stream, right? And then we have recently Ken Wilber comes along, and he says that consciousness exists in a spectrum. And so I do kind of like that. I kind of see it, the whole idea, stream, spectrum, we're talking about flow. We're talking about something that's moving. And so ultimately we're talking about energy, which puts us back to the fundamental part again, right? So basically, consciousness, it is kind of this energy that exists all around us and inside us and just all throughout everything. And so, the way that we have, those sound, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, health and well-being for ourselves and for others is by having this deeper sense of self, looking to this part of our conscious and our experiences of being alive, that is our ego self. And so it's about what is our relationship with the outside world and the rest of the life forms we share this planet with, and as much as looking at those social networks and relationships that we have in our life. It comes back to that balance idea there. And just a few more notes here on the ego self. So, really it's kind of hard to define, but like I said, it's really about, identifying, interacting with just, everything that we share in this world, and just, connecting to the outside world. We can even say it's, once again, go back into those transpersonal states of consciousness. It's about going into that higher state of consciousness and realizing that you're one with everything, right? I feel like a Yoda now. Alrighty there, so let's see, I've just got a few more of some of my favorite and dear psychologists and some of their ideas on ego self. Bill Plotkin, if you guys ever get the chance, he's actually a pretty cool, I really enjoy his work. I think it's a pretty cool, he seems like a pretty cool guy. I've never met him, but the next one I have here, Davis 2004, that was one of my professors. That's Dr. John Davis. I had him at Naropa University, and really cool dude, and lots of good ideas going on there. So, sorry, didn't mean to have that there. All right, guys, so now that we have looked at consciousness, and we've kind of thinking all these different states of consciousness, let's talk about sleep and dream for a little bit. So when it comes to sleep and dream, of course, we have those fundamental questions. Why do we do it, right? And it seems that it's a natural part of the biological process because all creatures sleep, right? We all need sleep, and sleep is a circadian rhythm, we say. It's because it's a pattern, it's a cycle that happens. And so for us, we're what is it, diurnal, I think, when you're a daylight creature, but nocturnal when you're in nighttime. That's based on that circadian rhythm, depending on which one you are. And a lot of it, once again, it's all about the brain, what's going on in our brain, that activity that's working on those kind of unconscious levels, guys, right? And so we know that a lot of our sleep pattern has to do with our hypothalamus, and in our hypothalamus we have what we call our suprachiasmatic nucleus, and basically that's our internal clocks. That's that little voice that says, hey, you're sleepy, go to sleep now, or hey, it's time to wake up, and for us, since we're daytime creatures, a lot of it is a sensitivity to changes in light. So once again, it's that stimulus, that outside stimulus coming in, gets picked up through those synapses and our neurotransmitters, and it starts going to our brain and says, hey, they're starting to get light out here. Start waking up now, right? And then we see that too at night. So at night, then we have the opposite thing going on. We have all those chemical or those electrical processes going on, but then we've got to think about those chemicals too. So as the brain is being alerted to the changes in light, you also have those release of hormones and like I said, those neurotransmitters going on there. So we know that with the suprachiasmatic nucleus, as daylight fades, it tells that pineal gland to secrete melatonin, which helps us go to sleep. And then as the light increases, it tells that pineal gland to stop melatonin, so that it can we can start waking back up. We do know also serotonin is a neurotransmitter that we think plays a role in our sleep and wake cycle, and we used to think that it had to do with promoting sleepiness, but it doesn't really seem to be that simple. It seems to be like it has something more with our body temperature, and kind of like the role that plays in helping us goes to sleep. And supposedly higher body temperature means we're more active, and when we sleep we should have lower body temperatures. And I wouldn't say that's true or not. I feel hotter at night. My husband's hotter at night. We have high body temperatures there. So why is sleep? So now why is sleep important? It's like, why do we do it? Why is it important? And we have some theories on that. We have the adaptive and the restorative theories. And so basically, it's a way to conserve energy and to keep animals safe. So once again, we have those daytime animals and those nighttime animals, because as human and animals evolved and we started going into those prey and predator categories, having different sleep patterns helped increase your chances of survival. Out in the wild, most predators hunt at night, and the prey are active during the day. It's really to try to avoid those hunting hours. There is why we see those differences. And then we have the restorative theory, and basically sleep is when our body regenerates itself, because we do have body growth and cell repair that does occur during sleep. And I would say that both of these theories are correct. I'd say why we started sleeping, and then or why we started sleeping in the patterns that we do, and then the why sleeping is important to us. So I think they're kind of tangent there. And then once again, I think it does go back to just our brain is so inundated with information that I think our heads would explode if it didn't, protect us from being overloaded by that. And I think that sleeping, even though we dream, and that's kind of a way of, processing some of that information, I do think that, sleeping is our time for, kind of give ourselves a little break, give our brain a break too. Just a few statistics there. We say that most adults need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. As you start going down in the stages of development and looking at different age groups, you'll see those number of hours increase. Newborn babies are the ones that they sleep the most, and it's because they need the most sleep because they're new. Their bodies are rapidly adjusting to, just being alive. And so they sleep so much because it's their brains, basically their brains and their bodies are developing during that time. And so if they don't get proper amount of sleep, they don't get that proper development. That goes the same with us even as adults, depending on the amount of sleep we have gotten in a night or a week or whatever, it can have effects on our health and just our functionality too, right? All right, so when we go to sleep, we actually go in stages. We have two types of sleep. We have REM and we have the non-REM, which is those shorter, lighter sleep periods. I would say that's kind of like that nap mode when you get on the couch in the middle of the afternoon and you're sleeping, but you can maybe still hear the birds outside chirping, that and you don't dream, you just kind of lay there. That I think would be non-REM sleep. And then when it comes to sleep, as I've already said, we have different brain waves that are being activated. In normal waking consciousness, we're always in those beta waves. Those are the normal. There are waking short waves there. As we start though to go to sleep and get drowsy, we move into the alpha waves, and those are much longer waves. And like I said, that's when we start to get drowsy, once we start to relax. Those delta waves, those are like the longest and slowest brain waves that we have. And it's if that's kind of when you start getting into those transpersonal states and higher states of consciousness. It's about being able to be in that delta state, but not while you're asleep. It's about being actually in conscious awareness of it. And pretty cool stuff. Wish I could do it, but I can't. But anyway, so as we go into those alpha waves, then we also have these theta waves. So in non-REM, kind of a light sleep, and so these are the stages. So we start out at this N1, these light sleep theta waves. That's when you're just starting to fall asleep. That's the time when you can have that knee-jerk reaction, and it's like you're gonna fall and you snap back up, or kind of a sleep paralysis type of experiences people have. So that's why I have hallucinate there, because sometimes it's in these kind of light sleep that we have these types of things happen, and it goes back to, is it just something someone's making up in their mind, or could it be something prophetic, or is it something from somewhere else? Until we fully understand consciousness, we can't fully say. We used to think that sleep paralysis was caused by little demons. The ancient Greeks, I think the Egyptians believed it too. A lot of cultures, the little demons would come and sit on your chest. Their culture believed that it's like the idea of succubus and incubus. It's like these women from other realms that come and do these things. And sorry, I heard one of my goats. I was afraid she was out in the road there. All right, so anyway, just a little side points there. Next, then, we go into stage of sleep. Say sleep spindles, theta waves. So you're falling asleep more. Your body temperatures drops, and those spindles, they're little. Think of it as like lightning bugs in many ways. It's like, you just the lightning bug, you don't see it, and all of a sudden you see this little light, and it lights up. Think of that in your brain. It's like you're falling asleep, those brain waves are getting longer, and then all of a sudden it's like beep. You kind of get this little bolt of electricity, right? All right, and then when you get to N3, this is the deeper sleep. This is where we have those delta waves, like I said. It's the deepest stages of sleep, and those delta waves, we say, may dominate 50% of their brain activity during the stage of sleep is what we mean there. All right. Now, what's really interesting is that we think that with REM sleep, that's when we're dreaming, that we are in these deepest states of brain activity there. But really, it seems like we're more in those spindles. It seems like, everybody dreams. If you know, a lot of people may not remember their dream, but we all dream. The only group of human beings that do not dream are the criminally insane. So, you know, they make up 3 to 5% of the population. And, you know, remember that for the next time you tell somebody you don't dream, you know, because you're telling them that you're a psychopath. And that's not true. It just means you just don't remember your dreams. And if you think it's the other, you might want to see a therapist, right? Licensed therapist there. So, but anyway, my point is that we all sleep, and we can have multiple dreams throughout the. We can have multiple dreams, but dreams are really, it's kind of at the end of our sleep is when we start dreaming. It seems to be more the case, and so you know, it's kind of like as we're starting to wake back up, is kind of when we're in these dream states. And so once again, that's where we can kind of see, you know, transitioning from those deep brain waves to kind of those more lighter and kind of you know, spindly ones that it kind of, once again, it creates a little disrupt there in our conscious awareness, right guys? And then in many ways, when we are in REM sleep, it mimics wakefulness, but you know, but we know that we're asleep. And it's very interesting too when you get into thinking about if animals dream. I think they dream. I think I can see it with my goats and my dogs and cats. They certainly look like they're dreaming and look like their little eyes are in REM sleep sometimes. So, yeah, interesting stuff there, guys. All right, so in looking at sleep, we also want to look at sleep disorders. So we have a few. We have nightmares. Nightmares are just any bad, disturbing, horrifying, an unsettling dream. You know, something that just, you know, disturbs your pattern of sleep and then maybe interferes with your waking reality. And I don't think nightmares have to be all like horror movies and slash them up. It, you know, goes back to Freud there. Our unconscious is going to, you know, when something's wrong with us, you know, when something's a little off, our unconscious is going to give us this profound, you know, kind of slap in the face to get our attention and help us to address that. So, you know, nightmares don't always have to be scary stuff out of horror movies. I know I don't like to say that I have nightmares, but when I get really stressed, I do tend to have nightmares. And I'm telling you, they're really silly stuff when I wake up and think about it. It's like, I just, you know, that was so silly. Why did that, you know, why was that disturbing to me? And once again, it goes back to breaking it down, trying to figure out what those dream symbols meant. And, you know, I have figured out for to stop some of my nightmares, I had to figure out what it was that was really causing me stress. And once I did figure that out, I don't have those dreams. Now I have different nightmares, different things stressing me, right? but I'm saying, you know, Jung and Freud, there really is a lot to some of these ideas that we're talking about when it comes to our sleeps and our dreams and how that affects kind of our behaviors, our thoughts, our emotions, and then our engagement with others. And then we see REM behavior disorders, and this is when people will act out in their sleep. So these are the people that kind of hit and kick about in their sleep. We have sleepwalking, some somnambulism is how you say that, I do believe. And then we have night terrors, and that's when you wake up in a state of panic. It's more predominant in children than it is in adults, and we usually some kind of something very traumatic had to have happened in a child's life for them to still, because night terrors usually seem to go away as we get older, but when we still see it present in some adults, once again, it indicates some kind of a, you know, sickness in the brain there. We have insomnia, and that is just, you know, when you can't go to sleep or you don't stay asleep. Sleep apnea, and that's when people will stop breathing in their sleep. And then we have narcolepsy, and that's when we start to fall asleep, and you just fall asleep in kind of inappropriate circumstances and situations there. And we say, do sleep disorders interfere with normal sleep? absolutely they can interfere with somebody's normal day-to-day functionings of life. And then that leads us to dreams, which is what we get to talk about in one of our discussions this week. So when it comes to Freud, he thought that dreams, they will wish fulfillment. So it's that we're manifesting something, something inside of us. And that manifest contact, that's the dream and the event. But then there's that latent content. That's the symbolic aspect of it. And then we have the idea of the activation synthesis hypothesis for dreaming. Basically, our cortexes, our cerebral cortexes are interpreting brain activity that's generated in our pons. So therefore, in pons, that has to do with like our cognitive, how we think. So in many ways, dreaming is just another way of thinking. Revision of the activation synthesis theory is the activation information model, AIM, and basically what it says is that information, so all that stimuli we get during our waking hours, that it influences the synthesis of dreams. So what does that mean? It means that all the stuff that we get thrown at us, we may be aware of consciously or unconsciously or subconsciously, that it all gets into our brains. And so when we go to sleep at night, it's just kind of, that stuff just kind of plays out. And then, like I said, in many ways, it's kind of like garbage disposal too. I think some dreams we have, they are kind of garbage disposal type dreams, to where it's just our brains, getting rid of stuff we don't know, or spring cleaning, maybe that's another way to say it, getting rid of that stuff. And then when it comes to dreaming, we say, what do people dream about? And just all kinds of stuff, guys. All kinds of stuff. You name it, people dream about it. Probably even stuff you don't think about. People, we dream about everything. And then when it comes to dreams, are they meaningful? Are there such thing as prophetic dreams? And, can people predict the future with those dreams? And those are just questions that we don't really know. It seems sometimes maybe so, sometimes not. Data is kind of inconclusion. And then once again, when it comes to these ideas of like hallucinations and alien abductions and things of that nature, how does our consciousness and our dream state and what's going on with our brain account for that? And like I said, a lot of times when people feel like they have these kind of supernatural visitations, it's in those between times when they're coming out of those deep delta waves and going back into those theta, come back up into those beta waves. And so we think that maybe it's just some kind of what we call it, the hypnagogic hallucinations, and it's just kind of like it's just your brain and just kind of trying to connect back to that conscious reality, which is why we call it hallucinations. Basically, it's like your brain is making that up. And so scientifically, we can't prove things like ghosts or other supernatural visitations because, once again, we just don't know enough about consciousness and the timing of these experiences to know what's really going on in the brain and stimuli from the outside world. So, all right, guys, that wraps up our discussion on consciousness. There is just my list of sources that I use throughout this PowerPoint, my reference page here. I include that just to give you guys some example there of how to set up different sources. You'll notice, other than there are 3 on there. Oh no, I've got a good mix of different types of sources. I've got books, I've got journal articles, I've got websites there, websites with authors listed there. So good examples of if you're having trouble setting up your APA. And then of course, if you need any help with that or anything in class, guys, please reach out to me and I will see everybody in class as we discuss dreams more. Thanks.